Hello and welcome back to ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast. I'm your host, Sophia McLeod. Today on GCP, I'm joined by Paulo Limgenco, VP of Business Operations at YPrime, and Michael Tucker, VP of Patient Experience Commercial at Medidata Solutions. I sat down with Paulo and Michael to explore how AI and digital technologies are helping the industry build more sustainable, efficient, and patient-centered clinical trials. From protocol optimization and site selection to localization and decentralized trial models, the conversation examines how AI can reduce operational burdens, minimize waste, and expand access to clinical trials. Paulo and Michael also tackle the challenges posed by AI and highlight the importance of responsible AI use. This is a really insightful episode about how the industry is balancing innovation and responsibility while looking toward a more efficient, inclusive, and sustainable future. Enjoy. All right, so I am joined today by Paulo and Michael, and we are here to talk all things AI and sustainability. I think this is a really interesting combination of topics, so I'm really excited to talk to the both of you today. And I think you're both at two ACRO member companies who are doing a lot of really great work in this space. So I already just said it, but really excited to talk with you guys about this today. Back in 2025, YPrime won an Environmental Excellence Award for embedding sustainability into clinical trial workflows using digital platforms like eCOA, IRT, and eConsent. Medidata was doing a lot of great stuff in this space, also unveiling advancements to your study experience solutions at Scope, which is quite a big conference. So a lot of people were hearing about this, really highlighting the work that you guys are doing on using AI-driven protocol optimization aimed at reducing timelines and also operational complexity across clinical trials. So I'd love to hear from both of you guys. Paulo, maybe we start with you on this one.
Okay.
How should trial sponsors think about environmental sustainability as a strategic objective, not just like a compliance checkbox when they're evaluating digital and AI tools?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me, Sophia. And Michael, pleasure seeing you as well. From YPrime's perspective, I think, if I may say so, for the healthcare industry in general, it tends to be maybe an easier line to connect just because of the fact that our motivations through and through are always the health and safety of the general population and people in general. Whether it's delivering medicine, the performance of the trials, having the ability to utilize tools, whether it be AI or essentially any other initiative, the motivations tend to be easier to identify, in my humble opinion. And in this case, it's no different as far as the use of AI and how that kind of plays itself into the concepts of efficiency, sustainability, and all.
And Michael, what do you think about striking that balance, I guess?
Yeah, well, Medidata certainly has had a focus in the industry on how we can have a smaller carbon footprint, and I think that's any corporation is trying to check that box. Our larger Deso Systems corporation that oversees us is certainly reporting on that on a regular basis. But I think more importantly, as we look at that from a patient perspective and a site perspective, Medidata's goal has been how can we reduce the burden on patients and on sites? How can we help to streamline a clinical trial for our sponsors? And as a result of that, I think we see this reduction in the carbon footprint, we see sustainability, we see ways that we can have an impact on the world around us. So it's not just checking a box, it's more being socially aware of what we need to be able to do for the environment, but also what do we need to do to make the trials run more smoothly. And so a lot of the things that we've worked on have been focused from that perspective on reducing that impact on the sites, the patients, and the sponsors, and had a net result in reducing the carbon footprint. I started out years ago with the first decentralized clinical trial overseen by the FDA with the focus of how can we engage patients remotely to reduce the impact on them having to come to a clinical trial site. So how can we get patients who would not normally participate in clinical trial to come in and join? Somebody out in rural America or rural UK, wherever it might be in the world, that may not otherwise participate. And as a result of that, we have seen this growth in the industry of an interest in driving these direct-to-patient engagements. How can we engage with you as a patient? So, reducing the drag it had on your life, being able to collect information off of your smartphone, just like you do with other apps that keep you from having to go into a trial site. And then net result, again, is that we've been able to reduce the carbon footprint and provide a way for our sponsors and for our partners to be more socially responsible.
thinking about, like you guys have been saying, the impact to the patient and the real practical on the ground, how the patient experiences the clinical trial, what we're able to deliver for the patient on a faster timeline. I'm wondering if you're thinking about some of the operational benefits that AI and digital tools deliver within clinical research when making decisions around investment and implementation, how do we sort of tease out some of that as well, thinking kind of big picture in the ecosystem?
Yeah, some of the things that we've been doing, and not just Medidata, but other companies in the industry have been doing, is looking at the data that's already out there to be able to understand things like site performance and site uh, acceptability for a clinical trial. Where are patients located? Being able to look at epidemiology reports in the world to say, where am I going to find the highest population of patients with this disease or this therapeutic need, and being able to then address that through what are the sites that are available in that area, so that we can help to find the right patients closer to the sites, reduce that carbon footprint. And you need good tools to do that. So not only having the data, but being able to look through the data and make sense of it. And for years we've been utilizing as an industry some technologies that do that. But with the advent of some of the AI technology that have come out over the past 3, 4 years, it's just advanced that capability significantly. I think as an industry, there's sometimes sharing that goes on between companies, but oftentimes we compartmentalize a lot of that data. So making sure that we start looking at data a little bit differently. If we can de-identify data that's going to have value to the industry and be able to surface that in a way that allows companies to quickly assess, hey, I'm going to get more patients for my particular therapeutic area in, closer to Baltimore or closer to Atlanta, or maybe it's more rural America or in Africa, wherever it might be, will help us to design trials more effectively and be more productive. We can utilize technology to identify that and be able to point our sponsors in the right direction, say, hey, here's where you should conduct these trials. And I think also looking at the protocols themselves. We've got a protocol optimization solution that allows us to go through the protocol and look at 36,000 clinical trials that have been run and 27 years of data, and be able to say, hey, based off of what you're trying to do, you could significantly reduce the impact of patients needing to come to a trial site by doing these three simple things. So it reduces that impact on the patient, on the site, and on the environment.
How do you think about this, Paulo, when we're thinking about those bigger impacts?
I think with the industry as a whole, there is a common theme of efficiency. And I guess a common example from our organization at YPrime is the introduction of an AI backed and powered migration process. So we actually found that from our perspective, the ability to introduce efficiency through faster approvals, through cleaner data, more inclusive, the conducting of trials in general is part of how we define that concept. So having the ability, in our case, to reduce the number of screen reports containing errors, just a better quality screen reports, or reduction in human-led migration errors for the localization process. It really had the ability to shorten our entire review process by over 60%. So there were actually, in addition to that, no additional error types introduced as part of that review. So from that perspective, allowing AI to kind of foster an environment of efficiency and inject in jet fuel perspective that healthy balance of efficiency and accuracy that may or may not improve, over the course of multiple years with just human-led efforts, I think was an interesting way for us to kind of evaluate that need as far as the larger industry was concerned. But I couldn't agree more with Michael that the ability to conduct the trials in a more efficient manner, having the ability to get these trials inclusive of underrepresented populations are all great and healthy ways of both looking at sustainability in general, but the use of AI towards sustainability and these trials.
Paulo, one of the things I've noticed in the use of AI, and this is me personally, but also other people within our company, is that as we start to utilize it in, I think, very well-defined ways within the organization, we're able to start realizing things we hadn't thought of before. Oftentimes it surfaces information as you're looking at streamlining the process like you discussed. What types of aha moments have you had along the way where you've said, oh, we didn't even think of that. This is really great.
I think first, we started with the mindset piece of it. When it comes to AI, we tend to see that there's a broad range of knowledge on the topic in general and how to apply it towards our work. So getting a general introduction and understanding to the concept of getting at least directionally in the right place and directionally correct, as opposed to using AI with almost a demand for pinpoint accuracy, was really the first place where we really had to work with the organization on how this type of technology needs to be applied. From there, really evaluating the areas that we could help, whether it was due to a very manual nature of work, which is actually what brought us to the localizations front. It's localizations, as we found, at least from our perspective, probably one of the most manual in nature and kind of one of the most overlooked, but having the ability to, and I use this word very much all encompassing as a benefit to us, the sponsor, the patients, the sites, as you had mentioned before, but a speed to market concept, having the ability to get these out to certain countries, certain demographics, and again, addressing an underrepresented portion of the world is how we evaluated both the function and the need, and then kind of how we started narrowing down specific priorities within the organization. How about yourself, Michael?
Yeah, I think as we continue to build out some of these tools, we say AI everywhere, right? Everywhere we can find to put it in place. We've looked at things like how can we take a protocol and push it into the system, have that protocol read and build the EDC, right? Say here's how the EDC needs to be set up, and actually start doing some of the setup for it. And we've been able to eliminate timeline processes of that would normally be 3 or 4 weeks down to 2 or 3 days in cases, or hours. Same thing with ECOA, being able to take a protocol and read through the ECOA needs and then build forms out in there. Now, what it doesn't do is look at some of the specific ways that a customer might want to use, say, a diary. Right. It's not going to ask the questions of, so how would you like this diary question framed or phrased? But it can help you to streamline that and having those discussions with the customer and creating those diaries and making sure that the language is appropriate for the reader, right? Looking at, can somebody read this at the 8th grade level? Can somebody read this in another language or another country with the same intention as how it was written in English, for example? And as you say, localizations, so critically important and so time consuming and costly for the industries. The more we can start to look at ways that we can standardize those, create libraries, be able to pull from that information and reuse it, and know that it's correct this time, so we don't have to retranslate it or relocalize it and reuse it. I think those are some of the ways I see we've learned from the technology as we've moved forward and thought through it. It still takes that human in the loop. I don't think there's not a cyborg out there that's going to take us over anytime soon. I know there's a lot of talk about that outside of the industry as well, but I think the wise use of AI, and I think the programmatic use, so the proper use of AI within organizations is critical. I think most of the organizations we talk to or I talk to all have either a policy in place at this point, or they have their lawyers saying, stop, don't use it until we do. And within Medidata, we've got policies of what you can and cannot use. We've got very discrete silos of data. So you're not mixing data, you're not bringing in data from unverified sources, and you're not ending up creating hallucinations. But being able to use it in an appropriate way, a designated way, fit for purpose uses, I think is critical.
You hit it right on the head, Michael. I mean, really the responsibility aspect of AI is probably step one. And I think there's a reason that YPrime and Medidata are at the forefront of this conversation. I couldn't agree more that the people aspect of our roles are the work that we do, and the industry in general is never going to go away, and it's always going to be at the forefront of all things that we do. So re-clarifying my point about speed to market, it really isn't intended to be any sort of business approach, as it is kind of exactly as you and I touched on, Michael, the ability to really put the people, the patients, the sites, and the work that we're trying to do at the heart of the matter, at the forefront of all things that we consider, whether it be AI or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanna come back to the people because I think that is extremely important. But I wanna go back a second or two to when you guys were talking a bit about protocol design and how you can kind of get in early and avoid rework, amendments, all of that type of stuff. also think when we're talking about sustainability
Mhm.
and the impact of AI, I think we should also be thinking about just the impact of a regular run-of-the-mill clinical trial without using AI and all of the impact to the earth that that has, whether it's on equipment or travel or whatever the case may be. And I'm wondering if you guys have some lessons learned, perhaps, that you wouldn't mind sharing with those who are listening around what happens when you use AI earlier in the process to really help us reduce resources, duplicate efforts, but also just reducing overall clinical trial waste in general. I don't know if there's anything there that you guys have noticed as you've worked through this over the years that you'd want to share with folks. But that's something I think about. Just we already have quite a footprint, the clinical trial footprint, without thinking about new stuff that we're doing. It's already pretty significant.
Mhm.
And this really helps us lessen that.
I would go back to the earlier point I made about protocol design and being able to
Hmm.
look at years of history of data. And metadata has a discrete set of data that we access and use. The industry has a much larger set of data that could be used. And there's a lot of initiatives out there to bring some of those together. There's an Alzheimer's organization that's bringing all the Alzheimer's data together to be able to screen through that. I think the lesson learned there is we can look at these years of data of clinical trials have been run and say, what is the appropriate amount of time that needs to be spent, or for a particular type of compound, what are the different primary endpoints and secondary endpoints we should be looking at? Not just the pie in the sky, let's look at everything. I think the other side of it is the amount of data. We use a lot of sensors to collect data these days, and sensors bring you in millions of data points every day, whereas historically you've got hundreds of data points every day on paper, perhaps. But now you're collecting data that's real time, that's telling you a story about what's actually happening in that patient's life. The patient can recall it when they're sitting in their car in the parking lot and share it back to you and say, yeah, I think 6 weeks ago I was feeling this way. But with sensors, with ECOA, you're capturing that real time, but it's a volume of data. And there are some really innovative players out there with sensors. They're doing some really cool stuff, and sensors that can collect, 45, 46 different endpoints that have been approved by the FDA. But you don't have to collect all that data, and you shouldn't collect all that data. But what ends up happening oftentimes is you have a researcher who looks at it and goes, oh, wait, I can get all that data? And they start thinking about how they could use that data differently, or let me just collect it. I might use it someday, I might not. So I think it's really learning from those experiences and saying, okay, let's be very discreet in the way that we collect data and how we use the technology that's out there. I think there's also a responsibility for making sure that as we use devices like that, whether they're sensors, iPads, tablets, phones, etc., that we properly reuse them in the industry. We oftentimes have devices that have to come back in from a study that was run for a short period of time. They get reconditioned and pushed back out rather than buying a brand new device out there. But we've got to be socially responsible from that perspective as well. And AI helps us with some of that, helps us to understand, what the effective life of a device is and what we can and cannot reuse, but also, where we should be targeting how to get the appropriate devices out to a study. So for example, just because the sponsor says, I want 45 devices out of that site, doesn't mean that you should have 45 devices out that site. Analyzing the historical use, analyzing just-in-time technologies for delivery, you can have a depot that has devices that can be sent to the site rather than having them sit at the site that never get used and at the end of the study just get thrown away.
Couldn't agree more, Michael. And the way I kind of see it, Sophia, is there's kind of two aspects that we as an organization are hoping to address. I think historically speaking, the entire trial from years back always felt more linear in nature, A, then B, then C, then D. For me, especially when it comes to AI, and obviously with responsibility and sustainability in mind, the first benefit really allows us to almost take that process and work in parallel. It's not an A, then B, then C. It's what aspects of A can go alongside what aspects of B can go alongside aspects of C and run those in parallel. And for me, that's where the AI components, whether it be on the devices themselves or the way we look at the data, really allows us to almost shrink that time as well. And that for me is a second benefit where you're taking those components as well that were predominantly, if not fully, human-led, and allowing AI to be that sense checking factor for you without necessarily having it do the work, or to Michael's point, taking the place of the human to do that work. It's really a matter of allowing AI and that machine learning aspect of it to take that timeline and what would have taken a certain amount of months or certain amount of years to develop, analyze, and come to certain decisions on data to be a real moment in time situation.
Oh, that's a great point. I don't know if you saw it or not, but the FDA approved real-time access to clinical trials. They've got 2 trials that are being run with Amgen and AstraZeneca that are looking at real-time clinical trials where they'll have access to those endpoints real time to help make adjustments along the way. So rather than waiting until all the data is collected and then coming back and saying, yeah, it wasn't effective, they can help those organizations make changes along the way. Yes, protocol amendments still, but for a good purpose, right? Saying, hey,
Yeah.
tweak this a little bit because you want to collect this other information, or this is not effective, so maybe we shut the trial down because we're seeing that the endpoints are telling us that it's not a good trial. But I think that that's a good use of AI is being able to evaluate that data real time and understand, is this an efficacious use of medication for the patient or treatment for the patient, or should we make changes along the way or just stop the trial altogether?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of those points are also what brought us to the topic of localizations ourselves. I mean, I know we've kind of touched on it a couple of times now, but the ability to really kind of evaluate that data and really get these trials out, and it's fairly near and dear to me, but the opportunity to get that to underserved nations, underserved communities, underserved populations, and afford them the ability to participate in these trials. I mean, that in and of itself just really helps justify our responsible uses of AI, but also in addition to that, kind of gives us yet another reason to continue supporting what it is we're here for, which Michael said earlier is ultimately the patients and the sites. And for us, it's easy to look at, US based trials and certain trials under markets that we're very much used to, but having the ability to broaden these trials in, dare I say, record time is invaluable in so many ways.
Yeah, I know we've been talking about this episode sort of thematically as sustainability and AI, but I think thinking about it even bigger picture, it's about access and how can we get as many people who should be in clinical trials into clinical trials as easily for them as possible.
Yeah.
Things are always a long road, so I'm hoping we speed up the road a little bit.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I started in preclinical research years and years and years ago, and I started working in there with the belief that we could shorten the time it takes to get a treatment to market. And the idea was, how can we streamline the process we do in the preclinical side before it goes into clinical trials? And now that I'm in clinical trial side, I asked the same question. And one of the interesting things that happened this last week, I was at a meeting, and there was a gentleman who was presenting about how we're able to reduce the number of animals that are used in preclinical trials. How we're able to refine our studies. And he posed the question, do you think we'll ever stop using animals in preclinical trials? And starting to look at cellular testing, et cetera. And I said, I certainly hope so. I would love that, even though it was what I did for a good number of years. I would love to see that elimination if we could, but there's some things you just can't predict. But as we think about AI and the use of AI, we've already been able to reduce the number of patients that participate in a clinical trial through these synthetic control arms. So Paulo, I'm just wondering from your perspective, do you think that we'll ever be able to eliminate the human from the clinical trial?
Yes and no, Michael. There's obviously the people are at the center of anything and everything that we do as an organization and as an industry. Obviously, the hope from that perspective is the tools that we have at hand complement the people that are involved. And at the same time, obviously, there's an inherent kind of push and pull where, yes, I mean, the people will always be there, so to speak, as obviously we're developing medicine or alongside partners who develop medicine. And so there's kind of a wishful thinking yes and a wishful thinking no. So excuse me for kind of straddling the line there, but it's a little bit more nuanced the way I kind of see it. So
it's intriguing. We talk a lot about using digital twins. Deso Systems, which is our parent company, uses digital twins of aircraft and cars and cities and biospheres, et cetera, to model what the effect could be if they change a wing or a car door or whatever it might be. So the 3D modeling and the whole idea of let's create that digital twin first, so that you don't spend a lot of time or expense in your design to put a prototype out there that's not going to work. And part of the reason that we're part of their organization now is that we believe that you can have a digital twin of a human being eventually. So we've got a digital twin of a heart, and digital twin of a brain, digital twin of a lung, etc. As we start to look at that, we can mimic those biological systems that we have in the human body and start to look at a more maybe predefined focus for a patient. So I think we can limit down, probably like you're saying, the number of people that are involved or patients that are involved. Maybe get away from the clinical testing, but maybe make it more prescriptive, make it more directed, and maybe get to the point where we have enough information about people that I can just take my finger and stick it on a scanner and it says, hey, Michael, based on this information, we think that your medication should be XYZ.
Yes. And that's a great point, Michael. And it's interesting to me because as we go through the conversation and even conversations outside of this, everything always in some way, shape, or form tends to kind of narrow to the concept of efficiency and how AI technology, the work that we do kind of helps in that department. And for me, this is no different. So I agree fully. The ability to kind of narrow that patient set or understanding the patient type or the components that make these trials just run with any higher level of efficiency. I think that is probably one of the most compelling parts of the work that I do. And I know the work that a lot of my colleagues do is that's the human element of it, at least in my humble opinion, where you really get to define what efficiency looks like. But no matter how we look at it, it's all kind of boiling down to that common theme of efficiency.
Yeah, I have a shameless plug for ACRO, just building off of what Michael was talking about. But on the ACRO blog, we have an article actually written by Lisa Moneymaker, our ACRO board member from Medidata, about digital twins. And it's fascinating stuff. But I did have a question, actually, a final question, because I know we're coming up on the amount of time I'm allowed to steal from you guys today. So I wanted to end off with a really light question about ethics. Just keep it easy breezy to finish. But I'm curious, we're doing a lot of work on both sustainability and AI and clinical trial access and all of that stuff that we've talked about today internally with ACRO. You guys have been great participants of the ACRO working groups. And so I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the idea of governance frameworks and best practices and how you think about the industry coming together as a collective. I know there are many instances where the ACRO members are rather competitive with each other, and I think ACRO is a great forum for you guys to really collaborate and talk, as an industry with one another and come up with solutions. So with that in mind, I'm wondering if you could share with our audience, some of those governance frameworks or best practices that you see emerging to ensure ethical, reliable, but also sustainable use of AI in clinical research as we move forward?
I would say, we talk about the ethical side of it. Ethics covers a wide range of topics, I think, in our industry. And one of the biggest areas is probably protection of data, right? And so a good governance structure needs to be put in place to understand what are your approved uses of AI? And I'm not just talking about AI like, ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or something like that, but any type of AI use where you're collecting data into a source file and you're then, going through that to come back with some type of recommendation or some type of report or visualization to make sure that we're respecting the rights of the patient. We're respecting the rights of the site users. We're respecting the rights of the sponsors themselves and also of your own users. Sometimes we're sharing information that's being collected on computers every day. The use of the websites I go to is being collected by Google to feed back information to me, and whether that's ethical or not is still a debate for many people. But I think that we have to take the first step in the clinical trial space and say, make sure that your governance framework covers that. What are the appropriate uses of that data? How can you use it? Obviously, there's legal implications as well. But then also, what are the ways that we should help our teams think about using it? So I just had this conversation this afternoon with one of the managers here at Medidata, talking about how we could use some of these tools to actually capture or read through a protocol very quickly and advise a team member to be able to talk with a customer, and building things like a Gemini Gem to be able to search through that and look at it very quickly, versus just, as Paulo said, a new search engine. It's not just a new search engine where you just search randomly out there, but start to programmatically think about that and say, what's important for us to know? And then learn from each other as well. As we each go through and innovate on a cycle to say, what have you learned from this? What can we take forward for somebody else? And what are the best practices within an organization on how it's going to benefit the organization? There's a lot of, I think, misuse within organizations and individually as well that just is not effective. And we don't think about what that means to a server center. I'm here in Texas, and we've got a lot of server centers that are built up for AI use, and it consumes an awful lot of power. So it has an effect on the power grid. The more you ask, the more it's going to cost us as far as the power. And generating power means burning coal, using wind power, solar power, whatever it is, but somehow we've got to create the technology to do that. So I think we need to be aware of that and think responsibly when we're utilizing AI. The governance side of it is probably going to be impacted by your legal team. It's going to be impacted by your compliance team, who's going to come back and say, here's how you can use it within the organization. And I think there's some room for debate there too. Oftentimes I've come back to our legal team and challenged them with questions about, well, here's how I'd like to use it. Is there a reason why I can't use it this way? Or this is the tool I'd like to use. Can we evaluate this and have the IT team go through the evaluation? And I think that's careful process of making sure you're doing vendor selection on which AI tools you're using, what's the purpose of it, how are they using the data as well. So being very cautious about that. And it's part of the governance process as well. I don't know, Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, Michael, just kind of being involved on the sustainability front as well, I tend to believe that Medidata and YPrime are really two of the standard bearers, if I may. Shameless plug on both of our organizations. But for us, similar to Medidata, we've got really tight policies from an IT perspective on the use of AI and how that applies to, our sponsors and our vendors from a supplier perspective. So, Sophia, to your question, I tend to look at it as two primary areas to address, with two behaviors to not just keep in mind, but keep at the forefront of all of our behaviors, which is the data aspect of it and the sustainability or environmental aspect of it, with an emphasis on being responsible and being mindful at all times. And it's non-negotiable in either way. From a data perspective, Michael touched on it exactly. There is obviously, I will say, no two people seem to have the same exact thoughts on AI, depending on what topic we're talking about. And we've kind of seen that no two organizations tend to have an identical view on AI or the use of AI. And so from our perspective, being a supplier in that equation or being a vendor in that equation, you really have to keep the data and the environmental impact at the forefront at all times, not necessarily prioritizing one or the other, and at no point sacrificing the responsibility associated to it and the mindfulness associated to it. To Michael's point, even using those tools available to us to essentially work through questions, thoughts, curiosities that don't necessarily apply to the work that we're trying to do in a responsible manner, it's already an irresponsible use of AI. There are obviously environmental impacts associated to that constant use, and we just touched on it again. Having that, it's easy enough for an individual to use that as yet another search engine, try to find, just generic answers and generic solutions. But at the end of the day, using that to enhance those two aspects, the data and the environmental impact, for me, that's kind of the healthy balance to strike. You don't necessarily want to get in a situation where all AI is bad, all AI is going to take over, the human aspect of what we do. But at the same time, there are true benefits to this technology in the context of finding better, more renewable energy, identifying more innovative ways of running your operations so that you're achieving not just one, but multiple aspects of your intended outcomes. That speed to market concept we talked about, or just having a general, I guess, more scalable operation that allows for not necessarily a one or the other aspect of doing right and doing good, kind of getting to both aspects at the same time.
Yeah, I think that will be a comfort to people,
Yeah.
to hear that both of your companies, and I'm sure many others as well who just
Yeah.
happen to not be here today, are, really coming at this question with that intentionality behind what they're doing and what they're using the technology for. With that, I'll let you guys go. This was a really great episode. I learned a lot. I hope our listeners did too. A lot of food for thought in this one, I think. So thank you both so much for joining me. This was
Thank
great.
you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sophia. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning in to ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast. We'll be back next week with a new episode.